Hi everyone, welcome to the Pre-Seed Show. I'm Anamitra, co-founder of A4 Capital. In this Pre-Seed Show, I talk to successful founders about what it was like before they became successful. When they first got started, what were some of the toughest questions that they dealt with? And today, we're going to talk to Dimitri Dadiomov, who's the CEO and co-founder of Modern Treasury. Dimitri and I go back quite a while. In fact, it predates both the founding of A4 Capital and Modern Treasury. The company has become immensely successful, raising just under $200 million, valued at over $2 billion, working with some of the best venture capitalists in the world, such as Benchmark and Altimeter. Well, if you have questions about what it was like in the early days, so do I. Let's get into it. Hey, Dimitri, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for the invite. Good to be here.
Likewise. So, Modern Treasury is a success by many factors today. If you think about how much money you guys have raised, how much traction you've had, number of employees you've had, but going back to let's say our time together when we were hanging out at the office at Foundation Capital, it was always clear to me that you wanted to found something, you wanted to start. Where did that sort of idea come from for you? Why did you want to be a founder?
It's a good question. I never saw myself as that, actually. I never saw myself as necessarily a person who wanted to go start a company. I was always very excited about new products, new technology, being at the moment. I think of it, a little bit of, I studied energy in undergrad, and I think of a little bit of it as like there's a potential energy of like a dam that holds it back together. And that's a lot of like ideas and like academia and things like that. And, that by itself isn't that super exciting to me. But that moment when the dam breaks and it turns into kinetic energy, it turns into a river, and all of a sudden there's kind of all this excitement, that is the most exciting part. And then eventually it becomes just a river, and it's like just pure kinetic energy. That's like sort of, Pepsi restocking shelves. That's also not as exciting to me. So I've always kind of been really focused on these moments when like you take an idea and you turn it into a product that people are starting to use. There's early adopters, they're engaging with it, and it's called product market fit, I guess, in some circles. But really, that moment is the most exciting to me, and that can happen in big companies or small companies or startups. Obviously, a startup is predicated on that happening at some point. So that was something that I've always been focused on. But the idea of founding, I'm not sure that was like the overarching thing for me. It was more like, what is the technology that needs to be commercialized, that needs to be kind of brought out into the world and get used by people day to day. That's the part that got me really excited. And so whether it's in a small company or a large company, or I'm the founder, or I'm not the founder, but I'm just and I joined a number of companies that I just got really excited about. So Modern Treasury is actually the first time that I've founded a company, but I'd always worked for startups that were commercializing something new. So sort of a nuanced answer there, but I think that for me, being around a product that early users are starting to use is the most exciting thing in the world, because you just have like so many new ideas and feature requests and vistas opening and things like that. Like that's a really fun moment.
Talk about sort of the dam breaking and new ideas. I remember that you were at Better Place, one of the earliest versions of in the energy industry, and then Lendinghome, which is one of the earliest sort of proper fintech companies, and then Modern Treasury. How did those two experiences, Better Place and Lendinghome, sort of mold you, or what did you learn from that you take into founding Modern Treasury?
There's lots of learnings from each of them, and they're very different companies. And I think the most important learning is probably having been an early employee at companies that scaled quickly. And in the case of Better Place, I was there from when it was about 10 people when I joined to about 600 when I left. Lendinghome, I was there for about 75 to 350. And so seeing those journeys of scaling and all the small and large things that happen to different individuals and teams, and, new challenges that you didn't have to deal with before because you're now bigger, and like reorgs, and there's many different elements of that, but certainly helps me today. I feel like that's something that I think about all the time, and I've learned having seen it, and not always in a good way. Sometimes it didn't work, but you learn from the mistakes for sure, and right. It's good when you're not learning from your own mistakes.
Yeah, Better Place is a good one because a terrific idea, a terrific team. What do, it seems sometimes from a distance that timing also matters when the market is ready to adopt, when the costs are down, when the systems are in place for something to take off. It's hard to time something, right? How do you think about sort of timing of certain sort of ideas into market which is ripe for adoption versus
Yeah,
not?
yeah, for sure. Timing is super important. I think the learning from Better Place for me is that it's not so much that you can time or not time, but it's the degree to which you believe you can plan and the degree to which you hold yourself to that plan, sort of come hell or high water. So in the case of Better Place, there was an initial idea that I still think was a brilliant one. And then 2008 happened, and and it relied on working with car companies very closely. And so 2008 happens, and the car companies, many of them go bankrupt. They're definitely not investing in new fancy R&D for electric vehicles. And so, the world changes, and you have to adapt to it. And so, I think some of the mistakes in the Better Place journey was really holding the company held itself to the original plan too much. And you have to be flexible, and you have to be able to pivot. And of course, it gets harder when the company gets bigger, and it gets harder when you have more investors and capital and employees and everything that goes into it. But I think a mistake that companies sometimes make, and especially founders maybe come from a big company, they think they can project the world too much. Like they like predict that they have a good idea, and they say this is the plan, and then they just go execute it regardless of what happens in the world around them. And if you just take the Modern Treasury journey, that's something that we're 5 years old. During those 5 years, we've had COVID, we've had the ups and downs of venture markets, we've had banks failing. So the degree to which the learning for me is, if I hold myself like to a plan that made sense in 2018 or 19 or 20 or 21, none of those make any sense in the world of 2023. And so you have to be flexible. So I think that's something that really, for me, came out of the Better Place journey and the Better Place experience, where we said car companies will act this way. But if 2008 happens and they all go bankrupt, you can't say that, that nothing has changed. Like, you can't pretend like that's not, that your world is not different. So, that's something that has been very kind of informative. Lendinghome is much more direct. Lendinghome is where, I met my co-founders and we had this problem. And so at Lendinghome, I think of that experience a lot just as a product matter. Like, I was the customer for a lot of what Modern Treasury is built. And so that's something that's really important. But yeah, I think every learning, every experience you bring learnings from.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. When you mentioned plan, it reminds me of something. You have to have a plan, and you have to execute the plan. But the plan also has to reflect reality, and the plan must change if the reality changes. I think Mike Tyson has a famous saying, like, everyone has a plan until you get hit in the face. And when you get hit in the face, you got to change the plan. That's practical.
Yeah. By the way, sometimes you have to change the plan without getting hit in the face. Like as a founder, you sometimes you should be opportunistic sometimes, right? Like, there are things that happen where, so many companies, when you actually learn the history of how they succeeded, what actually succeeded was like the 12th attempt at something that is different, and oftentimes very, very completely different. I don't know, Slack comes to mind as a perfect example of this. But there's you see an opportunity, and you should never get so caught up in your plan that you can't take advantage of it.
That's right. Seek the opportunity. That rarely comes, but when it comes, you got to seize it. Right? Makes a lot of sense. Lendinghome. Many founders who start something, they usually start with co-founders they've known before, and what better way to get to know someone than to work with them. And all three of you, Sam, you, and Matt, are all from Lendinghome. Did you how do you guys meet? How did you guys hang out? How did you guys realize that? Did the idea of starting something come first, or did the idea of working together come first, and then let's find an idea, or did it kind of happen organically inside? Because I think Lendinghome is a great. I think a lot of amazing founders have come out of it. come out of the company? What was that? What were you guys drinking? What was in the food at Lendinghome that made it happen? I got to hang out there every now and then. I remember. So, but there was a special energy in the company.
There was special energy, and I think a lot of it goes back to Matt Humphrey, the CEO of Lendinghome, who was just a very good recruiter, and he brought in people who were entrepreneurial, and he brought in people who, enjoyed working together. Yeah, I mean, here's another fun fact: is actually Sam, Matt, and I all started on the same day, so we were part of the same onboarding class at at Lendinghome, and so we also left the same day. That was more planned, but we spent 3 years working together, and Sam and I really worked together kind of day in, day out on the same product. So I was a product manager. He was a kind of lead engineer on the retail investing part of the website of the product. So we had a very deep and kind of long working relationship, building new things, dealing with bugs, handling, new customers, new making decisions all the time that obviously we continue to make as co-founders. Matt worked in a different part of the company, so that we became just more personal friends. Sam and Matt actually ran the engineering internship kind of program, so they were the ones running all the recruiting for interns. So they worked together more on that. But the actual product work Matt was doing was more on the borrower facing piece. So we were on opposite ends of the assembly line, if you will, for these loans. So we kind of didn't work as much together in a professional sense. But yeah, no, we saw this problem, and then we decided to go build a company. It wasn't like we were whiteboarding ideas and saying, okay, does this work? Does that work? We definitely want to start them together. It was very much oh my God, we joke that we call it rage founding. It's oh my God, every company we talk to doesn't have an answer to this. Somebody should build this. And we're looking for a solution that we needed, but nobody had an answer to it.
That's classic rage founding, solving your own problems, right? That you face a problem, you want to solve it. What was it? And as you got thinking about this, what was the process of recruiting Sam and Matt? Was it just conversations that happened organically and naturally, and then he said, why don't we get together and kind of do this?
Yeah, it was. It wasn't. Well, first of all, if anything, Sam recruited me, and then we brought Matt along. No, the process was, we had this problem. We built this website. It moved a lot of money. There was investor deposit and withdrawals. There was borrowers who were receiving funds, were collecting payments, and that spaghetti diagram of payments that just moving back and forth was a real thing. And as we started scaling up, we were doing, I think, 60 or 70,000 payments a month. So imagine getting a bank statement with 70,000 line items, and you're trying to understand what everything is. And there's different parts of the company that are interfacing with this data. So because I was the PM in charge of it, I had this meeting that anybody in the company on the operations side could come and ask us questions about specific line items. And the finance team had questions as they're doing month close. The capital markets had questions when they're doing warehouse lines. The customer service team was getting questions from end consumers sort of about these specific payments. And so I really wanted to get something that would be a self-serve product for them, and so that I didn't have to be this kind of monkey in the middle running around trying to answer the question. And we went around and started kind of talking to companies. And I think the moment really, at some point, Sam came and he was sort of frustrated with some of the interfaces that the banks that we're working with had. And he was like, we should start a bank. We could do this. We could build a bank that would be so much better. And I kind of looked at him and I was like, what do you know about banking? What do I know about banking? I don't know anything about banking. There's no way. That is just such a, I don't know if it's a bad idea, but it's not an idea that I had any kind of interest in. But I sort of pulled on the thread. I was like, okay, Sam, let's suppose you have a bank. What would you do with it? So what? Why would you be better? What would be the things that you would add to it? And, really it came down to a lot of these API interface kind of problems, and the ability to reconcile individual line items, and the ability to grow alongside your customers. And that's a software product, and that felt like something we actually know something about. So that led to what Modern Treasury became. But really, again, it kind of came out of this daily or at least weekly reality that we were just annoyed by.
That's right. When you must meet a lot of founders who kind of go through this process about about idea, finding a co-founder, picking the idea. To you, the three of you, it kind of happened naturally because you kind of lived and breathed the problem, and it became clearer and clearer. Obviously 5 years in, you have a lot more clarity on the problem and the opportunity. Back then, it started with a bold idea of starting a bank, but that seems outrageous. So you kind of sort of walked it back to something more sort of something that you can grok around. What is that? What was that? You also need, I guess, clarity even at that stage to convince each other to say this is the one that you want to work on, and then convince other people outside the three of you. And the space you were in is complicated. Payment operations. Most people don't even know or don't even want to know. I spoke with a founder recently and says doesn't ever want to touch payments ever again because it ruined half his life. So it's like it's a tough subject to communicate.
Yes. Yes.
And what were the moments of clarity during that process?
I think one of the most important things the founder has to come to terms with, if they're truly ambitious about building something that is big and lasting, is that you're going to go spend a decade of your life on that, maybe more, right? But and so it has to be something that you feel is broad enough and interesting enough. And I'll get back to why payment operations actually felt like that to me. But fundamentally, I think that, and as an investor, you talk to people all the time, and you can probably see pretty quickly what depth of understanding, but also depth of feeling. I mean, this sounds very touchy-feely, but do you really care about this problem, and why? And so, there's waves that Silicon Valley goes through, and there's certain new topics that are the obvious topic that everybody's going to go pick. And not to say that that's something wrong with that, or there's but it cannot, there has to be something that makes you feel that you really want to go build a company around this for 10 years when it's no longer a hot area, when it's no longer something people are excited about. And if you don't have that, you're not going to build the thing that is the full potential, ambitious thing that you presumably hope to build. So, so the thing about payment operations that got me really interested is there is this very concrete, like you said, kind of pretty prevalent manual drudgery problem that exists in a lot of businesses that is quite painful, and sometimes people never want to touch again. In fact, when we talk to candidates who have worked on payment things, it's a very clear signal. They either are I never want to do it again ever, or it's I want to do what Modern Treasury does and solve it for once and for all because it's so painful. So it's actually there's a very clear signal in that. But something about that really interesting is because it is the mechanical part of how companies are actually run, you end up definitionally getting involved and learning about every possible different business. So day to day, a lot of what I enjoy about Modern Treasury so much now is we spend time with business, every different business, and we'll learn about how things work and we help them with the mechanical part of it, but you just kind of go, and it's almost like the business school, case study kind of method where you go and you learn about business after business after business, and you start matching and saying, this kind of looks like that. And if you could actually learn from this other industry, in healthcare, they haven't solved this yet, but in construction they have, and you can kind of bring that over. So sort of for somebody who's just curious about businesses in general, it's even though it seems dry and mechanical and boring sometimes, the day-to-day of actually diving into different businesses is super interesting, and you have to do that in order to kind of power those businesses.
That's right. Like truly figuring out your motivation to start a company with the people, because many people start companies with external validation, or because something is hot in the moment, and when that passes, their interest in the idea might pass, and that you can't have if you truly have conviction. I guess for you, the option of going solo wasn't really there, or you might never have considered it. And there's great benefit in obviously having a co-founder, but you have two co-founders. How do you think about two versus one, as a team of three versus a team of two, which is more prevalent? But there are teams with four co-founders too, because there is an equity split, but also there is a lot of, if you have more people, you just get more help. You get there faster.
Right.
What advice would you give to founders who may be thinking about solo, but maybe thinking about not solo, but two or three? Like, how do you think about does the number matter? Is it the quality of the people? Like, what are some sort of thoughts you might have to share with founders just thinking about co-founders and equity splits and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, founding a startup is really hard. So doing that solo is going to be that much harder. And I think that ultimately you need all the help you can get, and you should try to weigh the balance in your favor. And certainly having amazing co-founders is helpful. I don't think there's like a magic number. I think the thing that's most important, I think maybe the failure mode that I've seen in co-founding teams, which is a very common thing. A lot of startups, they don't necessarily die because some competition got them. They just like, self-inflict wounds by not being able to work together well as a co-founding team. A lot of times it's because of either like it's basically a role thing. It's like, do you know who's doing which role? And it's very easy for Sam and Matt and I to split up the roles, or it has been from the get-go. And we trust each other because we've worked together before. Like, we sort of trust each other pretty implicitly. So it hasn't been something that's gotten in the way. But ultimately, you have to be able to rely on somebody. And I think, and by the way, I think if you're a solo founder, you still are going to have to rely on your first hires and first team. Right. So you have to kind of ask yourself, like, why is it that you can't sort of find a co-founder? Is it because you don't trust somebody fully to that degree, and because that's going to be a problem, later on anyway? Or is it because, and look, there are plenty of examples of successful solo founders. So I'm not saying that it can be done, but for first-time founders and so on, it's just more help is better. Like, your life's just going to be better. There's somebody else to go make decisions. You can take a break sometimes. Like those things really matter when you think about doing it for years.
That's right. One of the things is, for Modern Treasury, you're selling software to large enterprises. You're partnering with banks and so on. How did you, in the beginning, how did you sort of position the product? Who did you think of as your customers? Who did you think of as your partners? How did you get the ball rolling with the initial MVP?
Yeah, it was really hard. And, we went through YC, and in YC, you do this weekly meeting where you check in and you basically say, like, this is my progress for the week. And we had a lot of weeks where we had no progress that was demonstrable in any way. And so that's something that we spent a lot of time figuring out. It took us about 6 months to go from kind of officially founding the company and starting to write code and starting to talk to customers to when our first customer was live. And it was an early stage company in the health insurance space called Sana Benefits, and they were working with SVB as their bank, and Sana was our customer. And so really what we thought of is, like, we thought of customers being companies that would have to go build a system like what we had to go build inside of Lendinghome, who were probably earlier stage, or maybe they're a bigger company, but they were starting a new product. And they needed this. And so, like, their alternative was essentially, like, either we dedicate 3 of our engineers to go figure this out, and they've probably never seen this before, so it's brand new, or, like, here we are, we can kind of, like, we have a product that does this, and hopefully we can make you, we can get you to go live very quickly. Now, the challenge with that is, like, the first customer is the hardest. Like, the first customer is for an infrastructure product, right? There's a couple of problems here. One is nobody wants to buy, like, financial infrastructure from a startup that it maybe isn't as, like, established or funded or has any other customers, or, like, there's no real social proof that this is going to work. And so a lot of companies we would meet with, and they would smile and nod, and they would say, like, this is a great idea, I would totally be a customer, just not the first one. And so Will Young, who, in case he's listening, deserves a lot of credit for this. I mean, he, like, the first customer of a B2B company is who puts the company in business. Like, the founders, the investors, the first employees, everybody gets all this credit for it. But, like, really the first customer is who makes the thing, like, this house of cards, sort of into a business. And so anyway, so that was our first customer, and they had a pretty complicated use case. It was a health insurance kind of health benefits use case. So where they were bringing money in every kind of payroll period from their customers. They were splitting it up. They were putting in different reserve accounts for dental and medical and vision and so on. And then when somebody went to the eye doctor, they would like cut that check or send that ACH or what have you. And so even to this day, it's a pretty complicated, sophisticated use case, but we were able to work with them and stand that up and then be able to and then build that. And, like SVB was the bank that they were banking with. So we were already building to the SVB kind of integration piece. But then SVB also saw, hey, there's a company that normally in the normal order of things would have taken 6 months to go live, if ever.
Right.
And here they are 2 weeks later, like live and happy. Like, how did that happen?
So was it about making the integration with SVB much easier for an SVB customer? That's what got Will excited. The implementation period would be much shorter than what it would be normally for them if they were to do it on their own.
Yeah, and they didn't have to do it. I mean, not only would it be shorter, but the alternative would be not just 3 months instead of 2 weeks, but also they're at the time they were like 4 people, so like they didn't have engineers to spare and say go figure this out. And obviously this is the other thing about payment operations is while it isn't really core, it is critical. Right. So like you do need to make sure that it works well. So you can't like half build it. When somebody builds it, they have to go build it, to a degree of stability and degree of like testing that's like pretty well. And so, so that made that decision, again, subject to the idea that you trust that this company is going to be around and they know how to do this and all that. Like it's a no-brainer.
Right.
But getting there when you're just 3 people and you don't have any customers, that's a really hard thing to demonstrate. So, but yeah, so we had a bunch of conversations. It took us about 6 months. We had a lot of clients clients in quotes who had this problem but they would not actually sign the dotted line and actually use us. And some of them came back, a year later or 2 years later or 3 years later, but, and some of them did not, but I think that is a really hard thing to do, to figure out how to get that first, like, triangle to work. Right. Like we had Modern Treasury, we had integration of a bank that worked, we had a company that banked with that bank, and they used it, like, and they signed it, and like that. Right. That's the beginning of what obviously right. Modern Treasury has become a version of that triangle, like hundreds of times over.
That's right. Was it something at some point during the conversation with Will where it kind of the bit flipped, where you realize, okay, now this is going to be different from everyone else who's interested but not on signing? Like, what was the final push that got him over the line to sign? Do you
That's
remember?
A really good question. I don't know the answer to that. I told him about, I'd known Will before, and I told him about what we're working on before I even left Lendinghome, and he had started working on this new idea. He had seen a problem of this. He was I believe he was the first employee at JustWorks. So he had seen a version of this in a payroll context and been like, oh yeah, I know there's a whole payments team. They're doing all this stuff. Like, so he kind of knew what was coming. So he was a more sophisticated buyer. But I don't know what actually made him go. I don't know if they tried it and were like, oh, this is going to be kind of hard. Like, let's just like, these guys seem to, they seem excited about this. Like, let's just make them do it. I don't know if that was it. Yeah. It's a good question. I don't know, but it took us, but it was, I guess it was a 6-month sales cycle or something like that in that sense.
Right. If you were to start Modern Treasury with the benefit of hindsight, how would you find more wills? Or is there a way to accelerate finding more wills like that in a shorter time frame, or get more people over that? Or founders, or is it just the founders should just be prepared for this discovery, for this sort of like a winnowing down of people who are interested but also ready to go?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a way to shortcut it. I do think founders should be not afraid of selling. Founder selling is really important. By the way, a lot of the customers that we talked to that never signed, we learned a lot from. So like from a product feedback and product discovery sense, it was super useful. Like and learning about, I remember spending a lot of time at Airbnb. Like that was not going to be a company that was going to like use our product when we were 3 people and they had 500 people in the payments engineering team. Right. But understanding their problems was super interesting and useful because Lendinghome was a domestic only product. And so we didn't have to worry about kind of all the international stuff. So understanding like what actually becomes more complicated when your business is cross border and cross time, right? Like when you pay for an Airbnb, they'll take the money, they'll take like some part of the money now, they'll hold it. Then like in 6 weeks, when you go to France, they'll pay it out in euros and they have to worry about like the FX of it and things like that. So that was not something that existed at all in the Lendinghome world. Like there was a lot of complexity, but it was entirely in one currency, domestic. And so anyway, so I think that I don't know if there's a way to shortcut it, but I also think that part of what founder selling is actually product discovery and understanding the dimensions in which your product can or cannot serve various types of companies. And so even when you get bigger and even when you have a sales team, even today, like I find it very valuable to go spend time with prospects that we don't close, and it's not a waste of time. It's like you discover the thing beyond the margin that like you kind of like need to get your product to be better at.
That's right. That's like the time well spent with customers, even if you can't close them today. However, like when founders hear a lot of no's from customers, some founders begin to question the core of the idea. Like if no one wants it, like should I be working on this at all or not? Did you ever go through that process about that experience? Like if everyone is saying everyone is interested but no one's signing, what does it mean? Like how did you get through that?
We had that a lot. Well, we had a conversation, and I think it's a conversation that every founding team should have, kind of like a very honest conversation between the co-founders saying, how long are we going to give this before we know? Just like, suppose it doesn't work, but you gave it 3 days. Like you'd be pretty disappointed in yourself, right? Like it's just like you didn't learn anything. That's not actually like a so that's an extreme example, obviously. But we kind of looked at each other and we all said, like, I think we can do this for 2 years. Like if we don't make any like obvious demonstrable progress in 2 years, like we should call it quits. But like let's not revisit this question of should we or shouldn't we every 2 weeks or every month. It's not productive. It gets in your head. Like you're literally doing anything but work when you're thinking about that. And so, maybe 2 years is a long time. Maybe it depends on your personal burn and your funding situation and all sorts of things. But that was kind of our mental state. So when we got no's in month 2, 3, and 4, it didn't feel good. But we're also like, I got a while still before I got to like sort of face the music. And so let's just keep going and discover it and discover what else could work. And so, probably, 12 months in, I think we felt pretty good about where we're not in terms of actual kind of revenue metrics or something, but like in terms of product traction and count of customers. And like, it felt like it was really kind of clicking. But like I think getting no's, if you're going to get really, and maybe you should listen to yourself. Like if you get a lot of no's and you're like, well, maybe this doesn't work. Maybe you just don't care about the problem that much, right? And so at some level, like maybe you should listen to that. But there's no startup journey that isn't just like a lot of rejection. And it's not just customers, right? It's investors. It's candidates. It's like you just have to be okay with it.
That's right, and you kind of have to believe that you're going to see this through. That eventually this will work. And then everyone is going to get it, but it's going to take people time. But it's a good framework to give yourself sufficient amount of time and not to revisit the question every half an hour after every customer call.
And maybe giving yourself like a specific timeline also, because I think that gives you peace and says like, I'm not going to do this for the rest of time. Like if it hasn't moved by June or whatever, then like, we'll talk about it, but like, don't come to me with these questions until then.
That's right, because it's kind of it's like demotivating, right? If that's all that's like why why are people rejecting it? Figuring out why and then solving the problem, and then continuing in that path. And as you guys did, you clocked some big customers and big partnerships along the way. What was the first big breakthrough that you had, either on the partnership side or on the customer side, where you felt the 2 year thing, should we revisit this? Like that's gone. Like we don't have to worry about that anymore. Like this thing is going to be here.
I think the biggest moment has actually happened about 3 months, 3 months after Sana went live. So this is 9 months into the company. And so we worked with some folks at SVB who were working with Sana and making sure that they were going to go live. And Sana went live and it was super exciting. And we finally were live and we could go tell everybody like, hey, like we have a customer. We have, like if you turn off Modern Treasury, somebody's going to care. And we signed up another company that we published a Medium post about like what we're up to. And this company came to us and said, we want to use it. And like we signed a second customer and all of a sudden we're like, and they were a real estate company. So all of a sudden we're in real estate and healthcare. I was like, wow, we're like multi industry. And then our third customer, that was the moment that this team that we worked with at SEB came to us and said, hey, like there's this other company, they're much bigger. They're like a 100-person company. So they weren't like massive, but they were not a 3-person or 4-person kind of seed stage startup that needs to build this. And we think that you guys can help them. And we met with them and we signed them and there's a growth loop that worked there. And that was the thing that felt we didn't have a formal partnership yet. We didn't have any, but like they recognized the value of what we brought. The company was a qualified lead. Like they understood like why we existed. They had this problem today and they signed, I think within a week. I mean, it was like a very quick sales cycle. And all of a sudden we were like, wow, if this can keep happening, we can just kind of do this for a while. So that was a big moment. And so that company, which is still today a client, as a Sana, was our first kind of like, and the persona changes. Like in the beginning you sell to founders and then eventually for us, like, there's kind of this, sometimes the CTO kind of owns this world and sometimes the CFO kind of owns this world and it's sort of tracks with size. So as a company gets bigger, the finance team gets built out. And when you look at a 20-person company, usually there is no head of finance or maybe there's one person in that function. But when you look at like a 1,000-person company now, there's like a real finance team, obviously, that has a lot of power too. So that third company, it was an introduction from the bank. The VP of finance was the buyer. It was like a week long of a sales cycle and was like, wow, felt like we sort of arrived.
Right. It felt like textbook. This is the way it's supposed to be, right?
Totally.
It felt perfect. Why didn't this happen before?
Correct.
It's that's terrific. It's the space you're in, payment operations. Your money is moving through the pipes that you're building. It's somewhat complex to explain to people who the customers are versus who the partners are. Positioning is really important. You've done a lot of work. The company's done a lot of work on content generation, raising awareness, like a beginner's guide to payment operations and things like that. You guys are really good at content. Is that part of a concerted effort to explain the problem, explain what Modern Treasury does, raise awareness in general, simplify the solution you're offering, and clarify the problem? Like it seems like it's not just something that you've done recently, but it started a long time ago, and there's a cadence of work there. There's a large body of work to get you to where you are today, and in terms of positioning.
It is a big body of work. So our first employee, Rachel Pikes, joined us soon after that third company signed, and she joined to build the growth loops and the growth kind of marketing function. So, I was kind of running around talking to banks, talking to companies, doing some product work. Sam and Matt at the time were both writing code, and Rachel joined to really think about how do we power these things? How do we like get more of these intros? How do we get more of these, get in front of people who are thinking about it? And the reality of when you're creating a new category, also like nobody knows what it is. And so you got to explain it. By the way, like you don't really know what it is. I mean, you haven't defined exactly what it includes and what it doesn't include. And so you have to, and so for us, like writing has been like a really good way to explain to ourselves what it is that, that we will do or we will not do. And then you can kind of deep dive into different industries and be like, how would an insurance company work like with us? How would a marketplace use this? What would happen if you had, and then that obviously leads to a bunch of conversations with companies to say like, okay, like let's talk about your problems as a marketplace that is maybe doing this like sub wallet thing. And all of a sudden you have a ledgering problem and that leads to a whole other product in some cases. So Yeah, it has been something that's been very concerted for us. It's a long-term game. It's hard to do this and like see immediate results. But then when you get to the top of Hacker News, or when you get like leads that are just like they found that perfect, uh, you know, piece of content that describes what their problem is, it's really powerful. So I think there's companies that do this really well. I think also if you have some sort of like incident and you speak about it, like Cloudflare is one that comes to mind that does this really well, where it's a way to earn trust and to say like,
Right.
we know we're trying to be the right default perfect answer for this. Sometimes you will not be. So how do you like use those moments to earn trust and actually share some of the things that you learned? And we saw this past year. I mean, this was less about us, obviously, but when SVB crashed, like we had a lot of customers who were deeply integrated with them, and so using that moment from I mean, obviously in a customer service sense, but then also like in a content sense, being like, oh, we can be a bit of like an expert on this. Like we see this across a bunch of different companies. We have some authority when we speak about it. That was something that we earned after many years of investing in it. So I'm a firm believer that if you're doing something that's new and interesting, content is a valuable
Right.
thing, because that's how people understand what you're doing, and then they can kind of raise their hand and be like, I want to work here, or I want to use this product, or you got to talk to my friend, or whatever it might be.
That's right. That's right. Content is evergreen, especially if you can explain something clearly and simply, especially
Yeah.
as it relates to category building, because you're kind of defining the narrative, and you're explaining something a lot of people are confused about. But the time when the banking collapse happened, SVB and then FRB, that must have been a tense few weekends or months or something. Like, what was that like inside the storm, your customers must have been freaking out. I don't know. What was that like?
Yeah. Well, first of all, going back to where we started this conversation, whatever plan you had for March of 2023 is irrelevant.
Right.
Right, because you didn't plan for any of this. Yeah, I mean, look, it was a very panicked moment. I'm sure that you experienced some of this as well, where companies are, especially early stage companies, oftentimes only had one bank account, and that bank account was at SVB. And so, just from a practical operational perspective, how do you like make sure that you can meet payroll, you can pay invoices, you can kind of keep your company running? There was something that was like very front of mind. Obviously, there was the the fear of losing money, of not just not being able to access it, but actually losing it if the bank was to go out of business or something like that. And so we had a lot of, and then kind of for us, we had this compound effect, which is a lot of our companies that were using, the reason we're using Modern Treasury is because they're using it for something where they themselves were providing a service that moved money. So now they have customer funds or something along those lines that are now caught up in this whole thing. And so they have to be able to give confidence to their end customers,
Right.
and they have to think about how to train their employees to answer those questions, and you just end up with this like many layers of issues. Practically the thing that so we were spending a lot of time helping customers. Sometimes they had other banks that they were kind of working with, and we could kind of set something up somewhere, but it's not a fast thing, so it's not like
Right.
you could really reset it up in a day. The thing that was really interesting was there's a huge lack of information about like what is going to happen with these different systems, and if I press a button, is the wire going to clear, and like what is going to happen. And we had access to it across all the different customers that we have. We did have access to a lot of systems of the bank, and were able to put together a status page to say like, this is what we're observing. This is like a net add to the world of something that nobody else has the visibility for, because we have so many different connections.
Right.
And so we realized at some point that we had that visibility. We put that together. We started publishing it. There's another bank that people don't talk about as much, but Signature Bank, which was also a bank
Right.
that we supported and also failed. And so we created a status page for them as well. And that was something that, every couple of hours we would literally just go and kind of update the HTML. It wasn't very fancy. It wasn't automated, but it was something that was super useful, because people started kind of sharing it and saying, okay, if you don't know what's happening, here's like a third party verification kind of
Right.
what is actually happening day to day.
Right.
So yeah, but that was, and again, going back to the content conversation we had, that then in a way builds our right to talk about this stuff, because all of a sudden in that moment, this is who they turn to for like information. So in some ways it's, and I don't mean that like, I wish it didn't happen, but when you have a crisis like this, like you can come out of it and your brand is a little bit stronger because of it, because it was like a trustworthy brand to turn to.
Right.
And I think that's important for founders to think about, like how are you the kind of company that lasts through these crises.
Correct.
So
and
yeah,
and last through them, be robust enough and flexible enough to last through them, but also build the level of trust in the brand that you're building through transparency,
right.
fast communications, and then thinking a little bit ahead, thinking about your customers first.
Totally. And a little bit of our, our positioning and our messaging of like, hey, like payment operations are super critical. Like having,
Right.
maybe having multiple banks is a good idea,
Right.
like a little bit less controversial post March.
That's right. That's right. It's like an obvious thing to do now, right? Everyone thinks that way. Switching gears a little bit, another big aspect of company building, and especially early on, is fundraising. You've done a tremendous job of fundraising from some of the best in the industry. What's the secret? How do you do it? How do you can you dial the clock back and think about and talk through the process of maybe the Series A or even, because I think each fundraise is different. Your different types of investors that are looking for different things. But early on, when companies are just getting started, there's no traction, there's no data, and even in the Series A, sometimes there's not a lot of traction. There's a lot of
Right.
vision. And look, what was your sort of thought process? Maybe if you can contrast the early fundraisers to the more recent ones.
Well, one really interesting experience that I think when you have a clear vision of what you're trying to build, then investors will self-select sometimes, and they'll either be into it or not. And so in that sense, as a founder, you're trying to find, it's a little bit like sales, where like it's okay to get a no because you learn from it, right? Like when you're talking to and you're testing your message, maybe is one aspect of it, and you're figuring out how to talk about it, how to describe it. But the other piece of it is like there are going to be some people who just naturally gravitate towards something or not. And for us, one of the things that was really interesting was we are a software product, and obviously we're like around payments, and so there's a lot of these natural questions of like do you take, like, is your business model, do you take a percentage, do you take what's the bips,
Right.
what's the rate, what's the and there is a I'm gonna kind of stereotype, but there's kind of like a fintech or financial kind of investor who like thinks about it in that way, because they want to be able to like build a model and sort of build a model that can kind of project forward and basically say like this is like a take rate, and I can kind of tie it to volume and things like that. And there's like a software investor. Software investor thinks more in terms of logos and like ACV maybe, right? Like they don't think necessarily in terms of like a take rate. And we always were like a software product, and we felt that was very strong. Like that was not up for discussion. Like we were not going to switch and become like a credit card network or something. And so we were very much focused like, look, we're trying to build a product that is the default payment operations product for any business that runs on it. And similar to how you might have a CRM thing, or like use AWS, or like that we want to be in that context. Like that is what we want to become. And when this is really successful, it's a software company. And there's a bunch of implications, and you can like or dislike some of them, but it was very eye-opening how some investors who were coming from a financial services kind of angle were like, oh, like I don't quite get it. Like where's the, where's the take rate? Where's like, what industry is it for? Like, is this for lending? Is this for marketplaces? And it's like, I don't know. We're building Excel. Like it's for everybody. Everybody can use it. It's a lot closer to a Salesforce or an Excel than it is to. And again, it's subtle. It's not something that we like. I mean, we felt strongly about it from the very beginning when Sam wanted to build a bank, and I was like, no, why? You don't know anything about a bank. But I think that like so as a founder, you discover which investors actually gravitate towards it. And so some of the like Chetan, who led our Series A from Benchmark, like he's invested in a lot of really successful software companies. He's learning about fintech through us. I mean, and I think that that's something that really brought him to us as much as it brought us to. I mean, Benchmark's an amazing firm, and we're very lucky to work with them. But I think that really did attract Chetan to us to some degree. Same thing with Altimeter. I mean, some of the greatest successes they've had, whether it's the Snowflake or Mongo or others, like they're software companies, so they kind of get that world. And I think as a founder, you're sort of a price taker, and you're like, you don't pick, like you can't convince somebody to like make that their bet. So I think that's a big part of it, is you sort of just test what the reactions are.
Right. Any mistakes you made early on that you wouldn't make today, that you would give yourself advice on fundraising, looking back 5 years, looking back 3 years, having gone through several rounds? Anything you would do differently? Any advice you would give founders who are starting off on how to think about fundraising? Because one of the things I see a lot is that fundraising becomes this obsessive thing,
Yes.
far and ahead of company building, customers, everything. Like it's a thing. It's a vanity metric. It's a large rounds. It's like and it's all consuming, because it's almost like a leaderboard. You're comparing yourself against friends and things like that. What advice would you give to founders who are just getting started? How the role of
I think
fundraising?
this may be a controversial statement, but I just think there's way too much gamesmanship in this stuff. Like, people play too many games, and I think that, and this is on both sides of the table, if you will. So there's a lot of like founders who will say, I'm not going to talk to any investors until a certain moment, and then like in the following 10 days, I'm going to talk to everybody, and I'm going to run a process. And it's like, okay, but like what? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, investors don't like it. The optimal investor might be on vacation or might be busy with something else, or like the meeting, and like you're just going to miss out on talking to them. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Now I understand why people do it. They try to like basically limit it. And if fundraising can be distracting, so don't get me wrong. Like, it is, you should limit it to some degree in the total kind of percentage of time you allocate to it, because you don't want it to get in the way of you running and building your business and running the company and all that. But like, when you try to create this very artificial process, like, yeah, of course it can lead to a check at the end of it. Like, I get that, but have you found the best investor? Have you spent enough time with whoever ended up funding you that you want to work with them for a long time? Probably not. Almost definitionally not, if you like try to kind of like cram everything into a week or two. So I think as a founder, you have to be sensitive to like, it takes time to build relationships. It takes time to understand what, for you to know how to say things and for the other party to hear what you're saying. And so like, don't do this nonstop. I mean, I totally agree with you. Like, some people will just completely get devoured by it. And it's like, that's not the goal. And it's not, but I mean, it is a goal. Like, you need to do that on the path of building a successful company, but you can't be doing that all the time. So yeah, I mean, if anything, I would just say like, treat investors like people and just get to know them for a long time. Like, and I think that like good things can happen out of that.
That's right. That's really good advice. Sound advice. As we wrap, one of the things that struck me is that I always find it fascinating when you first started, three of you in the Lendinghome offices, trying to nail down the idea, getting to your first customer, getting to then your first big customer, your third customer, and now looking 5 years in, multi-billion dollars worth, lots of money raised, amazing set of customers for whom Modern Treasury is essential. What does success now look like for you? If you sort of project out a few more years, what does the future hold for Modern Treasury?
Well, I feel like we're just getting sort of started, and what I mean by that is we're just getting to do. We now have a couple of customers in like most different industries, and we're starting to learn about what actually like is important to those industries. How do we actually work with them? We're starting to have a lot more scale and the ability to serve companies at scale. Like, we're now working with true enterprise companies. we have our product is a lot wider. So it started out with this payments API piece, the connection to the bank, but we have a ledger database that helps companies actually keep track of all this money they're moving, which is also an important job to be done. And we've seen companies that didn't do that very well in the past year that sort of have been in the news because they have not ledgered what the actual money movements were correctly, and that's a big problem. We're helping companies with reconciliation. We're helping companies with pushing all the data into data warehouses. So I think that the software kind of idea maze keeps going. So success for us really means like we're getting closer and closer to this kind of state that we hope to get to, where we're the default like finance software product that these companies use. And if you're going to get started with whether you use third-party processors, whether you use banks, whether you use crypto, it doesn't really matter. Like at the end of the day, like you need to be able to ledger what your business is and know, like, be able to report on it, be able to share it with investors, be able to go public someday. All of that is like critical stuff to building successful companies. And I think if we can help bring more trust into these companies, then it really does make a difference to the world. And it really does make a difference to how, there's fewer Wall Street Journal headlines that are around that. So, anyway, I think it is such a rich area for software, like innovations and niches and like iterations, that I sort of feel like we can keep doing exactly what we're doing, and the scale grows, but it doesn't feel that different.
That's amazing. I can't wait to sort of do this again in a few years. I want to thank you, Dimitri, for taking the time. I've been wanting to do this for quite a while, peeling back the layers to understand what it was like when you first got started and to where you are at now. A lot of founders look up to what the three of you have built at Modern Treasury, want to emulate you in other industries or in the same industry. So thank you for sharing the pearls of wisdom. I'm sure when this comes out, you'll get many more questions, and I couldn't be more grateful. So thank you on behalf of A4, on behalf of myself. Thank you to you for spending the time with me.
Thank you for having me. It's fun.
Whoa, what a wonderful conversation with Dimitri. I had a lot of fun learning about what it was like in the very early days of Modern Treasury, leading up to all their success today. If you're in the same boat, if you're trying to start a company like that, maybe batting around ideas, figuring out what to work on with your co-founders, or wanting to fundraise, if you need feedback on your idea, please do reach out to me on Twitter. Do follow us on YouTube also, and then check out our post on LinkedIn. I'd love to be able to help you if I can. Again, thank you for watching the show. Hopefully you'll watch many more of these, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye for now.